Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Anglo Election Insights, where we are crossing back to the UK to summarise what happened on May 1st with the local elections and the Runcorn and Helsby by-election, as well as to check in with national opinion polling, and particularly for the Welsh and Scottish parliaments, which are holding elections around this time next year. So a lot to talk about. Firstly, we obviously have the Runcorn and Helsby by-election. That was one of the big stories of the night. Reform UK's candidate won by only 6 votes over Labour. You can see here it was very much a 2-horse race. They actually had to do a recheck after Reform were only ahead by 4 on the first count, and several ballots were thrown out, and no one was sure what the result would be, but ultimately Reform came through. Obviously, the reactions were pretty savage on the Labour side, and it's placed further pressure on Keir Starmer's leadership. But for now, some fairly solid proof that Reform are very much a viable party in the Westminster system in these sort of red wall areas that Labour have been so successful in for so many years. So that was the first big story. But then as the night unfolded and the local council results started coming in, it became clear that some of the more modest projections of Reform gaining, sort of 300, 400, 500 seats were going to be a little bit undercooked. And in fact, they won 677 council seats. The Liberal Democrats were also big winners, gaining 163 for themselves. The Conservatives, the big losers, they got pinched on both sides by Reform and the Liberal Democrats. So they were down 674. Labour also down, and interestingly, down from what was ultimately a really poor result when these elections were last held in 2021. So, yeah, again, just part of a deafening narrative for UK Labour, who are under some really serious pressure at the moment. Independents down, and the Greens had some modest gains as well. I thought they might actually do a little bit better, but they did gain 44 seats. And if we have a look at how this looks on the map, so these were the councils that came up for election in 2025. This is what the map looked like in 2021, and there were additional council elections in other counties in 2021, but there's been a whole big thing about sort of restructuring those counties, and therefore those elections have been delayed. But of the ones that went ahead, the Conservatives obviously dominated in 2021, very popular. A few councils that they were simply the largest party rather than a majority, but yeah, as we could see, they made huge gains in 2021. However, moving on to the results from last week, and we can see that Reform has just annihilated the Tories, really. They've maintained their position in Northumberland and Buckinghamshire as the largest party, and that's about it. Reform has swept through the Midlands, storming through several of these counties. So we can see Lincolnshire, Nottinghamshire, they took Doncaster off Labour, Derbyshire, Staffordshire, Leicestershire, big majorities here. Western North, Northamptonshire, Warwickshire, they're the largest party. Worcestershire, big gains in Kent, and they actually became the largest party in Cornwall, to the surprise of quite a few people. The Liberal Democrats, for their part, they have gained control of Shropshire, which was somewhat of a surprise, I believe. Largest party in Gloucestershire. Wiltshire, largest party. Oxfordshire, they've gained control there by the looks of it. Hertfordshire and Cambridgeshire as well, big gains. As well as Devon, they are now the largest party, with Reform coming in second. Reform also winning majorities in Lancashire and County Durham. So big night for reform, obviously. Nigel Farage over the moon, and a lot of talk now about this sort of being the death of the Tories as well, that they're getting sort of pinched from both sides, with the Liberal Democrats threatening their left flank in a lot of their kind of rural southern heartland, with reform very much the preferred option for sort of the east and the Midlands and some of these kind of red wall parts of northern England that went to the Tories in 2019 but feel betrayed and don't want to go back, and they're looking to reform. So we also had some mayoral elections. In Doncaster, Labor was just able to hang on, and you can see it's a bit of a first past the post moment with Reform and the Conservatives splitting the vote here, but Labor just able to hang on there. In North Tyneside, Labor also just ahead of the Reform candidate. And then we have West of England, where Reform were able to come second, but Labor edging out them and also the Greens, who were hoping to win this mayoralty. We have Hull and East Yorkshire. This is a new seat, and Reform won it by about 8 points. And in Greater Lincolnshire, Andrea Jenkins won for Reform with looks like a 16-point majority. So big night for Reform. Probably feel a little bit aggrieved that they couldn't get up in Doncaster and North Tyneside, but really big night, and it really affirms that Reform are indeed a political force to be reckoned with. This is a bigger breakthrough than anything that UKIP or the Brexit Party ever achieved. This is quite serious now. And if we have a look at the national opinion polling, you can see here on the graphical summary, there's after some issues with some internal rumblings and a defection that did seem to rock them a little bit, they've recovered spectacularly, and the Tories have just fallen off a cliff at that time. But also note the Green Party and the Liberal Democrats continuing to march on higher as Labor just continues to fall and fall and fall. And if we look at some of the recent polls, we can see here, after a few tied results, now we're pretty much exclusively seeing Reform in the lead in a sort of 5-party configuration, with the two major parties, Reform, the Liberal Democrats, and now the Greens as well. YouGov has them in front by 7. Find Out Now has been a very generous pollster to Reform, crediting them with 6, 8, and now a 13-point lead with 33% of the vote. But as we can see, at similar points, the other major pollsters are finding Reform out in front with a vote share in the late 20s. And a lot of it seems to be coming at the expense of the Tories, who are getting knocked back into the late teens now and are facing very much a sort of existential crisis. We've seen this map here, the Nowcast, but it does demonstrate that these local council election results are more or less just a reflection of what we've been seeing here. This dominance through the Midlands, that certainly played out. Their newfound popularity in Cornwall and Devon as well, and Kent was one that we definitely thought they would perform really well in, and also in these sort of red wall areas to the north. So Reform absolutely on the charge. I thought we might also go and have a quick look at Scottish Parliament while we're here. So the next election is due in about a year's time. So these were the numbers from 2021. The SNP resurgent after the failed referendum for Scottish independence, winning almost a majority of seats with 64. Labour third place behind the Tories, whereas if we have a look at what we're looking at in the current projection as per this site here, Ballot Box Scotland, who I found just recently, we can see that the Tories and, well, particularly the Tories are really suffering, down to about half of the seat share that they had, and a lot of that seems to be taken by Reform, who are brand new on the scene effectively, and they're being credited with 15 seats. In Scotland, you have sort of like a New Zealand system where they have constituencies, like sort of Westminster style single member constituencies that are elected first past the post, and then you have like a closed party regional multi-member system, which, as you can see, that is where a lot of these parties like Reform and the Liberal Democrats would make their gains, and the Greens as well. So just looking back at these seat totals, so the SNP would still win a sort of minority government position. The Tories well down, Reform well up, the Greens pretty stagnant, the Liberal Democrats also making gains, but Labour's share not going down too much at this stage, interestingly enough. But then moving on to Wales. Now this was, when we look at the nowcast, we can see that one of the key areas that Labour is ceding ground to Reform has been in this sort of southern part of Wales. So down here around Cardiff, Labour's still very strong, of course, but these seats here, you just have a look at the red bubbles there, 1924. They are all seats that Labour won not only in their sort of car crash 2019 election year, but also in 2024. And now we're seeing that Reform are leading in these areas. And we see in the opinion polling for Welsh Parliament that they have climbed to second place here. In YouGov, their latest poll actually has Plaid Cymru leading with 30 seats out of, I think, 96, and Reform on second place. Actually, no, sorry, that's not seats, that's percentage of the vote. So 30% of the vote, they're out in front. Reform 25, easily leading Labour, who are leading the Tories. And then also Salvation with a slightly older poll, Labour still in front here with 27% of the vote, with Plaid and Reform tied and the Tories well back. But the trend is clear. Plaid and particularly Reform on the way up, the Tories slowly marching down, and Labour just cratering from the great heights. I think that's about all for today. So hopefully that gives you guys a bit of a rundown on what has occurred in the UK over the last week with their local elections, by-elections, and just a little bit of previewing for those regional elections in Scotland and Wales. Do subscribe to the channel if you're new here and you want to stay up to date with the latest goings on in the Anglosphere sort of political electoral system. I will endeavour to continue to create videos with an Australian focus, of course, given we've just had our federal election, but also in Britain, in New Zealand, the United States and Canada, where we've also had an election. Like this video if you've enjoyed it, and please comment your thoughts below if you have something to add. Perhaps you live in the UK, you've got a little bit more of an idea of what's happening there on the ground. I'd love to hear from you. But thanks again, and I'll see you all in the next video. Cheers.